All right, Jeffrey, here's a wild stat I came across preparing for today. Researchers took people with panic disorder and gave them fairly large amounts of caffeine.
Yeah, I know this paper. I know what you're talking about. This is one of those studies where they actually gave participants about 480 milligrams of caffeine. Right, that's a lot. Like that's a venti Starbucks. And they saw that about half of those people experienced actual panic attacks.
And this wasn't just one study. It was a full meta-analysis of like 9 studies across 200 and something people.
Yeah, right. And the placebo group that received no caffeine, 0 panic attacks. There is this very clear correlation or causation between caffeine intake and panic attacks in this group. And so ultimately what I took out of this is that people respond to caffeine very differently. And that difference is largely biological. Right? So if you're listening and coffee makes you feel anxious or jittery, there's probably a genetic reason for that. It's not in your head. It's actually in your genes, your hormones, and your brain chemistry.
Can you walk us through a little bit of what's actually happening in the body then when you're drinking a cup of coffee?
Yeah, so we're going to focus, what's happening in the brain today. And so caffeine, what it does is it blocks adenosine receptors. Adenosine is your body's tired signal. It helps calm brain activity and makes you want to go to sleep so you can recover. What caffeine does is actually blocks those receptors. It's almost like cutting the brake lines on your brain. Your body goes into overdrive, your heart rate goes up, and your brain interprets that surge really as a stress signal. So even though nothing's actually wrong, your body shifts towards fight or flight mode.
And that stress response isn't just a feeling, it's quantifiably measurable.
Very, very clearly, right? So you can see after consuming caffeine, a spike in epinephrine, which is that fight or flight hormone, and that increases by several folds. It's a very, very clear signal there. And then you have cortisol, which is your body's main stress hormone, and that can rise by, say, 30 to 50% above the baseline. And that happens even in habitual coffee drinkers, people who drink it every single day. So what's happening is your body is getting this danger signal when all you're doing is, I don't know, you're in a Zoom meeting, you're writing an email, you have a deadline, right? But you feel like you're in danger. And that mismatch is where a lot of this caffeine-induced anxiety comes from. So this is actually listed in the DSM-5, which is the gold standard diagnostic guide for mental health, and it's called caffeine-induced anxiety disorder. It's a recognized clinical diagnosis and a legitimate physiological response to really a psychoactive substance that your body can't handle the way other people's bodies can.
That all makes sense. But for instance, in that study, there was still the other half of participants that really didn't have panic attacks. So obviously not everyone reacts the same way.
Right. Otherwise, right, if we're all having panic attacks when we drink caffeine, like no one would actually drink it, right? And that's really why genetics matter. And what I wanted to say is, though, it's not just what's happening in the brain. There's another factor at play here. We've talked about that first gene, the ADORA2A gene, that controls how sensitive your adenosine receptors are. That's exactly what caffeine's blocking. And roughly 20 to 25% of people carry a variant of that gene that makes those receptors extra sensitive, right? So even 150 milligrams of caffeine, which is like a strong cup of coffee, that can feel overwhelming. The second aspect is really how long caffeine sticks around. There's this other gene that's actually in the liver called CYP1A2 that controls how fast your liver clears out the caffeine. And so about half the population metabolizes caffeine more slowly. So now caffeine doesn't just hit harder in some people, it also can last longer. Right? So that morning coffee, it can still stick around all the way into bedtime. Right? So if you're sensitive and a slow metabolizer, you've kind of got this double whammy effect.
So I think what most people would pull from this is the obvious advice you would give would be drink less coffee.
Sure, right? That's very true. But let's be honest about it. Most people are not going to do that. I don't do that. What's more interesting is how our bodies deal with the caffeine. Our bodies treat caffeine sort of like a toxin or poison that your liver is trying to get rid of and fix. And it does it by converting about 80% of that into something called paraxanthine, or PX for short. PX still has all those qualities that you expect or want from caffeine, the alertness, the focus, the mental boost, but it's a lot nicer to your body. So it's still blocking those adenosine receptors, but it does it in a different way, more selectively. It doesn't spike cortisol as hard, it clears in your body faster, and has fewer of these off-target effects. So many of our customers and consumers have also reported it being gentler on their stomachs and better for their sleep quality. Basically, it's kind of like a version of caffeine your body wishes that caffeine actually was, right? Caffeine's more or less the raw input. PX is the active but more refined output. The problem is that the conversion process is messy, it's slow, and it's very dependent upon your genetics.
What happens if you skip caffeine and go straight to paraxanthine?
So, as a scientist, that's where I think things get really interesting. Early studies suggest that PX, paraxanthine, may deliver similar, or in some cases, better cognitive performance with fewer side effects. People report things like less jitteriness, less stress, better sleep quality, fewer errors under pressure, so kind of more cognitive attention and focus. But there are a few reasons that might explain this. First, PX appears to be less disruptive to stress hormones, like I mentioned. Second, it's also been linked to nitric oxide signaling, which supports increased blood flow and may help people feel like this smoother physiological response. And the third, and perhaps most important, is that PX has a shorter half-life than caffeine, meaning it just clears out of the body faster. Right? So it's cleaner in, cleaner out.
For everyone at home listening, what's the 30-second takeaway from all of this?
I'd say, first, caffeine-induced anxiety is real. Second, if coffee is making you feel off, wired, or stressed, it's probably not in your head. Well, it is in your head, but it's controlled by your genes. And then I guess last, if you have that love-hate relationship with caffeine, there's actually solutions out there, right? You can now have PX directly in energy drinks and supplements in the coffee that we've developed here at Rarebird. It's showing up more and more. And as a PX consumer myself, I'm excited to see where this goes in the next couple of years.
Thanks, Jeffrey. That's awesome. If this finally explained why coffee does this to you, let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more science that actually makes sense. And if you're curious about trying something that might work better with your genetic makeup, check out the links in the description below.